Okay, hello everybody. It's lovely to be with you all today, and thank you very much for having us again. It's great to be here.
Yes, hello.
Yeah. So I'm Fiona, and this is Mark, and as you can see, I'm a violinist, and we're going to start just by telling you a little bit about ourselves and Orchestra Vitae, and then we have 5 composers that we're going to take you on a musical journey through London, and we're going to talk about them and play a little bit of music for you, and then at the end we're very happy to answer any questions that you might have. So I started playing the violin when I was 6. I also played the piano. I started playing the piano at 5. I just started at school, and my parents aren't musical at all. They were quite surprised when I brought the letter home asking for violin lessons, but here we are several decades later, and I sort of went to music college on a Saturday, but I grew up in Eastbourne. So after studying in the Eastbourne music service, I then went to, like I said, music college on a Saturday, and I went to university, studied music at King's College London, and then I went to the Royal College of Music to do a PhD, which was a history of the Royal Albert Hall, and now I work as a freelance musician and lecturer and an instrumental teacher, and yeah, I feel very privileged to be able to sort of make a living doing music, which is amazing. Having said that, it's been pretty tricky over the past years, I'm sure you can all imagine, so we're very grateful to have the opportunity to play live to you all today. I think Mark's just going to tell you a bit about himself now.
Great. So hello, so my name's Mark, and I started learning the cello, I guess, at a very similar kind of age to Fiona. I'm from a bit of a musical family, I would say. My mum's always done piano teaching and guitar teaching around her full-time teaching job, and then when she was bringing us up as children. I've got an older brother who also plays the cello, and actually my dad also plays the cello, so it's a bit of a dynasty there. And the reason that I picked the cello was actually because I went to see my brother play in a gala concert that the British Music Service did at the Royal Albert Hall, actually, so there's a connection. And I was so blown away with that I thought, right, well, I need to be in the next one. It was every 4 years, so I thought, oh, I've got 4 years to get to, I think it was a certain level to be in. I think it was the County 4th Orchestra, that then meant I could take part, which I did, and carried on through school. I then moved to Birmingham. So yes, I grew up in Bedford, and then I moved to Birmingham, read music at Birmingham, and studied at the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire. Studied cello there, and also Baroque cello, and have gone on to make a living through playing music, teaching music, and latterly getting more and more involved in early music and period performance through my Baroque cello playing. And yeah, it's really fun to be with you all today, and I hope you enjoyed the session.
So I started Orchestra Vitae in 2012, and originally the idea was to play one of my favourite pieces, which was Brahms's First Symphony, and that was just with lots of friends and colleagues, and then it was so much fun that we decided to sort of continue putting on concerts, and it's going to be our 9th birthday in April, so yeah, it's amazing how the time goes. We actually we had a concert planned for last year, but it has been postponed several times, but we're very hopeful that our next concert will be on October the 1st of this year, so hopefully some of you might be able to join us either remotely or maybe even at St John Smith Square, which is where the concert's going to take place. So I think we're going to crack on with our musical journey. So the first composer that we'd like to talk to you about today is a chap called Henry Purcell, and I think we have a map.
Oh, we do, yeah. So we're just to share our screen.
We're just going to share our screen with you.
Share the screen. There it is.
This is
share that one there.
Yeah, so this is where Henry Purcell lived, and he is considered one of the greatest English composers. And he had a unique form of Baroque music, which is sort of early music, like Mark was saying. And he was born on the 10th of September, 1659, and he died on the 21st of November, or thereabouts anyway. They're always a little bit sketchy with the dates. in 1695. And like I said, he was considered one of the greatest English composers. And in fact, there was quite a big gap between him and our sort of considered next great English composers. One of whom we're also going to be talking, or a couple of whom we're going to be talking about today, Elgar and Holst. So he was born in Westminster, in a part of Westminster also known as Devil's Acre. You can see he is quite close to the Houses of Parliament and Big Ben and all that. So not quite sure why it was called Devil's Acre. I'll leave that to your imagination.
And there's Westminster Abbey as well.
He had a younger brother who was also a composer. Yeah, and they lived really close to Westminster Abbey. And he's said to have started composing at the age of 9. And he went to Westminster School, and he wrote music for plays. And he also wrote several operas, one of whom is called Dido and Aeneas. And we're going to play a little bit of that today for you. He was married in 1682, and he was appointed organist of the Chapel Royal also in 1682, which he also had a position at Westminster Abbey. He was one of the musicians, the composer in residence there. And he was only sort of about 35 or 36 when he died, and the cause of his death is unclear. But one theory is that he caught a chill after returning home late from the theatre one night. And apparently his wife had locked him out because he was home too late. But that's sort of just hearsay. I don't know if that's actually true. And he's buried next to the organ in Westminster Abbey. And he had actually composed music for one of our monarchs, Queen Mary. And that music was used at his own funeral too. And then yes, that's a bit of Henry for you there. Yeah, so we've got a few pieces to play by Purcell, haven't we? So we're going to start with a rondo. Oh yeah, this is the statue of Purcell. This is in Westminster, Victoria Street. And yeah, you can see he looks a little bit like a flower. And the inscription is "The Flowering of the English Baroque," which is a memorial to Henry Purcell by the sculptor Glenn Williams. And it was unveiled by Her Royal Highness Princess Margaret on the tercentenary of his death, the 22nd of November 1995.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, so I think we'll start with the rondo.
Stop the share there.
Yeah.
You see us play.
And then we have a trumpet voluntary, and then we're going to play you a little bit of Dido and Aeneas. But this is the rondo. That sounds fair.
Thank you very much. That was the rondo from Purcell's opera Elgar or the Moor's Revenge. Now I just need to change my music.
Yeah. So now we have a trumpet tune or a trumpet voluntary, which Purcell also wrote.
So this would have been used for celebratory purposes, perhaps royal purposes or weddings and
In the Abbey.
big occasions. Exactly. Yes. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Short and sweet.
Yeah. So you were doing your best version of a trumpeter there, weren't you?
I was.
Fiona, on your violin, and actually you broke a hair on your bow, which is quite a common thing to do. That we just got lots and lots of horsehairs there in the bow, so do it very occasionally. They just come out, don't they?
They do.
When we're
It
using
hasn't
it,
happened for a
so-
while. Yeah. I'm now going to do an impression of a singer.
So this is from Didos by Purcell, very famous piece. Love in Greek
Mythology.
mythology. Yeah. So this is when I'm laid in earth towards the end of the opera, and Dido is contemplating her fate.
And death. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
It's
So
beautiful.
that was the Didos Lament from Dido and Aeneas, which is one of the first really successful English operas, I'd say, alongside an opera called Venus and Adonis by John Blow. And they're both quite similar. They're about 1 hour long each. So they actually make quite a nice pairing these days in concerts, one in one, one in the other. It's quite nice. Great. So now we're going to move on to our next composer and resident of London, which is George Friedrich Handel. Handel was, so his dates were 1685 to 1759, so actually very similar to J.S. Bach, who was 1685 to 1750. And he spent much of his life in London, despite being born in Halle, now in Germany. He was a very talented musician, and by the age of his first opera, Almira, was actually staged aged just 20. 5 years later, he made his first visit to London and settled permanently in the capital in 1712, becoming a naturalised British citizen in 1727. And you can see here, so there's his German name, Georg Friedrich Handel, with the accent, the 2 dots on top of the A, and then the anglicised spelling that he changed it to, which was George Frederick Handel, to make himself a little bit more local. So Handel moved to 25 Brook Street, which is quite near, it's just off Oxford Street, isn't it? It's kind of right in the middle of, I'll have a look at this map now. We're trying to somehow get to these top tabs. How do we get to that? We might just stop the screen sharing so we can just access this next map.
Yeah.
So I'll continue talking while we do that. So there was, when he was in London, he wrote his masterpieces, including Israel and Egypt, his opera, the 4 coronation anthems for the coronation of King George II, including Zadok the Priest, probably the most famous one, 1727, and the Messiah, and Samson, and also the music for the Royal Fireworks. And the Messiah was actually premiered in Ireland, in Dublin, which he lived in for a time. But he wrote much of it in this room that we can see here. And you'll see it's now called Handel and Hendricks in London. I'll come on to that in a little bit. So yeah, number 25, it was a terraced house with a 19th century attic floor and a shop front, which was added in 1905. From here, Handel could walk to the King's Theatre, Haymarket, where many of his operas were performed, and also to St James's Palace, where he served as composer of music for the Chapel Royal. He was unmarried and a lover of good food and wine, so I can relate to that. He held frequent dinner parties, but was increasingly in poor health in later years, and his eyesight failed. He actually died also at this home on Brook Street in 1759 at the age of 74, a good age. So, and yes, so this thing here, so Jimi Hendrix also actually stayed in this house when he lived in London for a good time. Actually, I think Jimi Hendrix died in London. I think he was resident towards the end of his life. But he wasn't aware that he was actually staying in the same house. I think he was in a flat. There are now 2 adjoining houses. I think it's 23 and 25 Brook Street that are now combined into a museum now that you can actually visit. You can go as a member of the public and visit. And I've been there to rehearse, because they let people who play Baroque instruments rehearse there for free, which is very, very nice of them. Yeah, so Jimi Hendrix rented a flat upstairs of one of the houses at that time, and later on he did discover the connection, and actually then I think he went out to a record shop and bought all the Handel LPs he could lay his hands on, and got to know some of that music there. So we're going to play, what are we going to play? Some of the water music. Yeah. And this was written for a flotilla of boats to go down the River Thames with the king. It's a very, very extravagant occasion. I think they set sail from Whitehall and sailed down to Chelsea. All the orchestral musicians on board this ship playing music as they sailed down, and then they got off at the embankment there and had a big feast, I believe, and then sailed back later in the evening. And I think the king liked it so much that they were playing till I think the small hours, because it was very, very popular. So we're going to play from that.
Okay, so we've got 2 hornpipes for you today. First one is hornpipe number 8. We're going to start with that, and then we'll do the other pipe. But they're both from the water. That's the first of our two hornpipes. And you might recognize this one. This is very famous from the water music.
Fiona, can you repeat that a little closer to your microphone?
Oh yes, of course. Sorry, that's
Fantastic, thank you.
from the water music. And it's quite famous, so you probably
I suppose Handel probably included so many hornpipes, being that it's sort of sailor's hornpipe. I suppose there's a nautical theme there. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great. So we've had Purcell and we've had Handel. Now we're going to move on a little bit in the chronology, aren't we?
We are a little bit, and we're going to talk about Mendelssohn. So, Mark will show you.
I need to get back on duties.
Oh yes. Oh. So, Mendelssohn's dates are 1809 to 1847, and his name's actually Jacob Ludwig Felix Mendelssohn, and he was originally born in Hamburg. And he had a precocious musical talent, and this first emerged when he was at university in Berlin, and he was very successful. He was a good linguist, he was a painter and a draftsman. And one of his earliest compositions, and it perhaps is like sort of most well known now, was the overture to A Midsummer Night's Dream, which is we're going to play you a little extract of in a few minutes. And this was actually completed in 1826 when he was only 17. And he had great success. He was music director in Dusseldorf from 1833, and he was conductor of the Gewandhaus Orchestra in Leipzig from 1835. And then he was actually a Kapellmeister, so like composer and sort of music director, to the King of Prussia in Berlin from 1841. And he actually was one of the first composers to actually revive music that had been played or composed earlier than him. People always wanted to play popular music, so music that was very contemporary. And he actually organised and conducted a piece of Bach's, and he did that just at age 20. So he was quite a trailblazer, I would say, wouldn't you?
Absolutely, yeah.
So he actually visited Britain first in 1829, and he had a sort of great personal charm, and this meant that he was sort of very well liked in musical circles and beyond, as we'll see in a minute. So he was made an honorary member of the Philharmonic Society, and he ended up visiting England 10 times, and he actually went to Scotland, and there's lots of music, like you might know the Hebrides Overture, and also the Scottish Symphony. So yeah, he did quite a lot of travelling. He also visited Italy. There's a famous Italian symphony as well. But he wasn't so impressed with British musical standards, sadly. And actually, of a performance of Handel's Messiah, he wrote, "Every note spoke loudly that an Englishman played it, and I did not care over much about it." So it was a bit awkward. But he has been credited with having a strong positive influence on the improvement of English musical life and for inspiring some sort of English composers such as William Bennett and Julius Benedict. So Mark's going to show you one of the houses he stayed at in London, which is 4 Hobart Place in Belgravia. And this was the home of the Hanoverian Embassy Secretary Karl Klingman. And it's a 3-story terrace, and it was built in the 1830s, and it's now Grade 2 listed. And I think we have a picture of that as well, don't we?
On the other one?
Yes, yeah.
Excuse me.
There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
There, that's the house. So it's amazing that they're all still available to see.
Very grand, actually. Yeah.
And he actually dined with Isambard Kingdom Brunel and Charles Dickens, and he enjoyed his meeting with Charles Dickens, but he didn't enjoy his meeting with Isambard Kingdom Brunel quite so much, apparently. But he also had a very sort of famous friend in Queen Victoria and Prince Albert, and we have a picture of him sort of playing to them. Victoria and Albert were both like hugely musical, and they loved playing piano duets together. And it was Prince Albert who met Mendelssohn first, because he was German, and he was a sort of massive follower of his music. So originally he just met Albert on the 14th of June 1842, and then he was invited back to Buckingham Palace to meet the Queen as well. And apparently, although I'm sure Mendelssohn was very sort of excited and nervous to meet both the Prince and the Queen, apparently they were also very excited and sort of nervous to meet him, because I think so, just because they sort of heard so much about him. So he actually sent them an arrangement after meeting them of his Scottish Symphony, and they actually attended quite a lot of his performances. So he wrote an oratorio called Elijah, and they went to that in 1847. And they had a really sort of in-depth relationship with him. And when Mendelssohn died, Victoria was very, very sad. And apparently later in life, she actually sort of exaggerated that he had been her singing teacher. So I think, yeah, they had quite a unique relationship, really, but amazing.
Great.
So we've got one piece by Mendelssohn to play through now, and it is very famous. Sorry, I'm just going to find it. I'm sure you'll recognise it.
We were talking earlier about Midsummer Night's Dream, and actually I can just stop sharing the screen.
Yes.
So he wrote lots of incidental music to be used within the play, and the overture, as you mentioned earlier, and then also the scherzo, lots of other dances, and this very famously the Wedding March. Thank you very much. So, Fiona mentioned earlier that after Purcell, there was quite a gap before the next, really what you might perhaps call a world-class British composer came along. So in the Baroque and the Renaissance period, there were many really outstanding composers, particularly church music, so Alice and lots and lots of composers like that. But later, there was a bit of a gap, and then comes along Elgar. So Elgar, his dates are 1857 to 1934, and you were talking about Mendelssohn not being particularly enamoured with British musical standards. In fact, there's a quote that goes around about Britain being the land owner music, the land without music, and Elgar certainly did much to restore the reputation of Britain as a creator and of brilliant music. So Elgar, he was born in Lower Broadheath, a small village just outside Worcester, and later returned there to Worcestershire, and she settled in Malvern. And you can go and see his. We actually visited, haven't we? His grave just outside Malvern, Little Malvern. He was also Roman Catholic, which influenced a lot of his works, particularly his choral works. And yeah, so he grew up in Worcestershire, and he took on he had quite a provincial life. His dad ran a music shop, and he generally went about playing the violin in lots of things in Birmingham, and ran evening classes for the ladies of Worcester. He wrote his Serenade for Strings, for that. And when he was 29, he took on a new pupil, Caroline Alice Roberts, the daughter of the Major General Sir Henry Roberts, and a published author of verse and prose fiction. She was 8 years older than Elgar, and Alice became his wife 3 years later. They were married on the 8th of May 1889 at the Brompton Oratory, and from then on until her death, she acted as his business manager and social secretary, and dealt with his very famous mood swings, and also gave him very keen criticism of his music and helped him to improve his music. She did do her best to gain him the attention of high society, but had somewhat limited success at that.
He was quite shy, wasn't he?
Yeah. And he didn't train at a music college as such. He didn't have those sorts of connections that perhaps some composers did have, and he felt that weighed down quite heavily on him. But however, they did, to try and get more connected with the musical world, they moved from Worcestershire to London to be centre to the centre of British musical life, and they moved to West Kensington. There's the blue plaque.
Blue plaque.
There,
And that's
there we go. So we're sort of just somewhere Hammersmith, Earl's Court there.
Yeah.
Zoom in a little bit. We've got West Kensington there, and I think it was another townhouse near the Tesco. There we go.
Yes.
I don't think that was there.
Possibly not.
And they had a child, Caris, who was born at this house in West Kensington in 1890. Her name was a contraction of Caroline and Alice, her mother's two names. And Elgar took every chance to go to concerts at the Crystal Palace. He and Alice attended day after day, hearing a wide range of composers, and learnt much about orchestration from hearing the music of Berlioz and Wagner, amongst others. However, his own compositions made a relatively little impact in the musical scene. He did have a performance by August Manz of an orchestral version of the Salut d'Amour, which I think we're going to.
Yes, we're going to play that in a minute.
At the Crystal Palace, and a couple of publications of small pieces for violin and organ voluntaries and part songs, but it's all very small scale stuff. So these tantalising opportunities to really cement himself in British musical life seemed to be ebbing away. There was an anecdote about where he had an offer from the Royal Opera House to run through some of his works, which was then withdrawn at very, very short notice because Arthur Sullivan, who's a very esteemed composer, of course, of G&S fame, but a very, very excellent composer in his own right, arrived unannounced to rehearse some of his own music, and suddenly Elgar was pushed to one side. Apparently later on, when Sullivan realised what had happened, he was mortified, but he didn't realise at the time. Indeed, while he was living in London, Elgar's only important commission actually came from his home city. The Worcester Festival Committee invited him to write a work for the Three Choirs Festival of 1890. So then, with these fading away a little bit, they returned to Worcestershire, set up home there, and he lived out his life there. But actually, then did have some really, really brilliant success with large-scale pieces, the Enigma Variations in 1899, and of course Cockaigne in London town, about the Cockneys. We've got a little bit of information about that one. So this is an overture by Elgar. The Cockaigne was a metaphor for gluttony and drunkenness, and the name applied humorously to London. Elgar described his popular overture as cheery and Londony, honest, healthy, humorous and strong, but not vulgar. And there are cockneys and church bells and brass bands and all sorts in that piece. So we're going to play you now
Salut d'Amour.
Salut d'Amour by Elgar.
Thank you. Okay, so
The good news.
so-
Oh, sorry. I was going to say the
Yeah.
good news is Elgar did have, of course, great fame later on. His cello concerto and violin concerto and symphonies are really very widely known now, and he went on to really realise all of his ambitions, I think, as a composer later in life. And our final composer for today is Holst, who was another composer who lived over the west side of London, actually. We'll have a look at a map there in a minute. So Holst, his dates were 1874 to 1934. Holst was born in Cheltenham, Gloucestershire, the elder of two children of Adolf von Holst, a professional musician, and his wife, Clara Cox. In 1893, he applied for a scholarship to the Royal College of Music in London, but the composition scholarship for that year was actually won by Samuel Coleridge Taylor. Holst was nonetheless accepted as a non-scholarship student, and his parents borrowed £100, a good deal of money back in 1893, to cover his first year's expenses. So here we have Holst here. Yeah, no, that's great. Holst left Cheltenham for London in May 1893. Money was very tight, partly from frugality and partly from his own inclination. He became a vegetarian and a teetotaler. 2 years later, he was finally granted a scholarship, which eased his financial difficulties, but he retained his austere personal regime. To support himself during his studies as a composer, he played the trombone professionally at seaside resorts in the summer and London theatres in the winter. His daughter and biographer, Imogen Holst, records that from his fees as a player, he was able to afford the necessities of life: board and lodging, manuscript paper, and tickets for standing room in the gallery at the Covent Garden Opera House to watch the Wagner operas. He secured an occasional engagement in symphonic concerts himself, playing the trombone, and in 1897 played under the baton of Richard Strauss at the Queen's Hall.
That was sort of around Regent Street, wasn't it?
Which was bombed in the Second World War.
It was in 1941. Oh. And in 1895, which is actually the bicentenary of Henry Purcell, there were lots of performances, and there of including a performance of Dido and Aeneas at the Lyceum Theatre, and Holst went to see that. And he said afterwards that he found that he'd sort of found a musical idiom of the English language, and he was very inspired by it. So there's a nice kind of like circularity to our performance today, because he'd heard the recits in Purcell's Dido, a bit like we played to you earlier, and he was massively inspired by that.
Yeah, definitely.
So he got his another year of scholarship in 1898, but he felt that he'd sort of learned all that he could from studying, and he now needed to learn by doing. And some of his compositions were published and performed, and in fact, the Times praised one of his songs, "Light Leaves Whisper," and they said it was treated with a good deal of expression and poetic feeling. And then after that, he took posts as an organist at various London churches, and Holst actually played the trombone, and so he continued playing the trombone in theatre orchestras, and he was appointed first trombonist of the Carl Rosa Opera Company in 1898. And Hans Richter, he played for him at Covent Garden, who was a very famous conductor, and he always praised Holst. And then in 1901, Holst married Isabel, and their marriage ceremony was at the Fulham Registry Office in 1901, as I said. And their marriage actually lasted until his death, and they had one child, Imogen, who Mark was saying was his biographer.
She was a successful composer in her own right, and actually became a close friend and assistant to Benjamin Britten.
And then in 1903, he decided to abandon orchestral playing entirely and concentrate on composition. But his earnings as a composer were a little bit too little to live on. So he accepted some teaching posts, one of which was at the James Allen's Girls' School in Dulwich, and he held that until 1921. but he had 2 other teaching posts for which he's probably more better known. One of which was at St Paul's Girls' School in Hammersmith, and I think we've got a picture.
We have. So we've got the blue plaque. Oh, skip it on. There we go. That's the blue plaque there
From
in
the school.
St Paul's Girls' School in Brook Green, Hammersmith.
And he actually wrote the planets at the school. And because they'd opened a new music wing, and that's where he could work sort of undisturbed. And in fact, then they moved from Barnes, which is where that other picture is from.
They used to live on.
So they used to live on the river in Barnes, which is not too far from us in London.
I took that picture
On a walk the other day. And then they moved to Brook Green to be very close to the school. So they had that wonderful house overlooking the Thames, but actually, because the river air was so foggy and polluted, they found that Brook Green near Hammersmith was a little bit cleaner for him. And he was very passionate. He wanted to be of use during the war, the 1914-1918 Great War. But he was too old to serve. But then right at the end of the war in 1918, he was given a job that offered him the chance to serve, and that was to be part of the music section of the YMCA's education department. And he worked with British troops stationed in Europe who were awaiting demobilisation. So he sort of became involved in a sort of musical and positive way. Yeah, but one interesting thing is that he had to change his name in order to do that, didn't he? From von Holst to simply Holst, and he did that in September 1918 because otherwise it sounded too German.
Yeah, so a bit like Handel, he also anglicised his name fully.
Yeah. Yeah, and he died in London on the 25th of May 1934 at the age of 59, and his ashes were interred in Chichester Cathedral in Sussex, so not too far from where I was sort of born and brought up in Sussex, and that was close to the memorial of Thomas Welks, his favourite Tudor composer, and Vaughan Williams conducted music by Holst and by himself at his funeral. So
we're just going to have a look at let's have a look at these locations.
Oh, yes,
I'll
please.
just switch the I'll just stop the share and just show you where these places were. I'll just restart. Oh gosh, wrong one. Okay. Share screen to that one.
That's where.
So here we have St Paul's Girls' School in Hammersmith. There, and actually the boys' school is just the other side of the river. You can see St Paul's School there, just on the south side of the River Thames. And then if we come down, I could go to the other tab, but it's easier just to come down the river. You see Barnes railway station there, Barnes Bridge, and just next to there we have on the terrace there. You see there is that's where his house was, next to Barnes Bridge. There, I hope you can see that. I can't switch tabs without. You can just stop share. Do that properly. Holst house. Restart. The share. And there we go. Holst house there. So we're now going to play some music by Holst to finish off. And so while he was working at St Paul's Girls' School, he wrote a suite for the girls to play, which was called St Paul's Suite, which uses lots of folk tunes. We're going to play a little bit of the first movement, which is a jig, and then the last movement uses 2 folk tunes, the Dargestan and Greensleeves.
Greensleeves, yeah.
Yeah, okay. We're going to do actually let's do the folk one first. Yeah. Bigger one. And now to finish, we're going to do the first movement. It's a really extravagant finish, so we thought we'd end with that. So this is the jig, the first movement of Holst St. Paul's Suite.
And we actually played this with Vitae fairly early on within our history, and it was always good fun to play.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for listening.
Yeah.
We hope you found it informative
And enjoying.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you have any questions for us at all, just, yeah, we're very happy to stay and chat for a bit.